So before I begin my sermon, I'd like to mention something. Usually I spend the summer thinking about what I'm going to talk about, and then within a few weeks I sit down and put pen to paper, or really I write it electronically on my computer. But as many of you know, my world changed a couple weeks ago when I had the honor of officiating at the funeral for my mother in my home sanctuary that I grew up in. That was the first time I ever spoke from that pulpit as a rabbi. I'd been on that pulpit as a bar mitzvah, as a confirmand, as a niftyite doing things that we're not going to talk about today. But that experience, like so many, has profoundly changed me, and it changed my words. I've not prepared my words as extensively as I normally do. So I do ask for a little chesed, a little grace, a little compassion. If I stumble or if I ramble a little bit, I beg your indulgence as we begin our conversation today. To start, I would like to start off my sermon with a question. Perhaps the question most commonly asked, why? Now, I won't be asking about the whys of the larger world. Instead, I want to start smaller. I want to start with us. Why are we here? What does this day mean for us? Why do we feel compelled to come back and gather to hear the shofar year after year? What is it about today, this day, this Rosh Hashanah, that touches our souls in a way that hits different from other times of the year? As modern Jews and those who are Jewish adjacent, we have the luxury of asking such questions. Our presence here today is a choice, a free will offering of our time, our attention, and hopefully of our spirits and our very souls. That being said, we acknowledge that given all the challenges, struggles, anxiety, pain, sadness, suffering, and anger that currently permeates our world, we are both blessed and challenged to be present, hineni, at this time, to even be asking the question of why. And yet we are thankful to be here in this lovely setting with our congregational family. To answer these questions could take us the whole year, let alone a whole lifetime to navigate. The reasons are just as varied as the people in this room, if not more so. And then when we do come to gather together at this time, we hear the same text chanted from the Torah year after year, the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. And thank you, Cantor, for enabling us to hear Emily's wonderful voice. She never sings for us at home. Every year, worship leaders, rabbis, cantors, and the like ask a similar question. Why? Why do we read the Akedah on Rosh Hashanah? Why did God demand that Abraham offer up his son Isaac as a sacrifice? Why did Isaac? Why did Sarah? Why did the two servants go along with it? What can almost offering up a child teach us, not just about our ancient heritage, but also about ourselves? And don't worry, this will be a little bit different than Rabbi Berezin's introduction. The most common understanding, according to tradition, is that the Akedah is a polemic against child sacrifice. According to the Talmud, the very concept of Abraham offering up Isaac never even crossed God's mind, let alone Abraham's. Other rabbis, including Abarbanel, go on to explain that God asked this of Abraham so that God and Abraham could demonstrate to the rest of the world that God does not want child, let alone human sacrifices. Though for the parents of teenagers, this concept of child sacrifice can be a tempting idea at times. However, this is not the only perspective to this challenging text. According to at least one midrashic interpretation, Abraham actually failed the test. He misunderstood the command olah, which can mean both to bring up and to make a whole offering. God meant for Abraham to bring up Isaac up to Mount Moriah, whereas Abraham understood it to mean to make of Isaac a whole offering. But even if that was Abraham's understanding, why did he agree to it? Previously in Genesis, God told Abraham of God's designs on Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham argued with God that as long as there were righteous living in those cities, God would not destroy them. But in this case, when told to offer up his son, Abraham, like Noah, remained silent. And because of this, Abraham failed to speak up, to question, to challenge, and instead merely to accept. Abraham's actions fractured his relationship with Isaac. Following the binding of Isaac and ultimately the lamb being offered instead of Isaac, Abraham returned down the mountain alone. He and Isaac parted ways. We don't know if they ever spoke to each other again. And more than that, even though Abraham lived another 75 years, we do know he and God never spoke again. This notion is upsetting, disheartening, and completely understandable. Abraham and Isaac experienced the Akedah in profoundly different ways as it shattered their relationship, all perhaps because of a simple misunderstanding, a notion that is all too tragic and yet all too relatable. Each was certain they had done what was right, and each was equally certain that what was done to them was wrong. They both lived in their own spheres of certainty, which made it hard to create space for the other, a lesson all too relevant to our times as well. Therefore, today is going to be a conversation about you and about me. It is going to be a conversation about us. It is going to be about what it means to be in relationship and what it means to be in community. And it is also going to be about what happens when tragic circumstances pull at us and threaten to tear us apart. To start, I want to do something which I rarely do, which is talk about myself. Not about my rabbinate, not about my immediate family, but about myself. I would like to start by stating that I am and have always been a very private person. It may be because growing up the son of a rabbi, I found it best to often keep my own counsel. There were things discussed in our home best not shared, which means I've always been very careful with my words and my thoughts. The reason why I mention this is because I actually don't like talking about myself. I like to speak on behalf of tradition. I like to speak on behalf of community. And as someone in the listening profession, ironic as I'm giving a sermon, I prefer to hear from you and how you are doing and what is going on in your life. So I wanted to take a moment to be very vulnerable with you. As many of you know, my mom, Linda, died just 2 weeks ago. Many of you have been very kind in reaching out and offering your thoughts, your condolences. You have also asked through gentle curiosity about why she died, which I haven't told too many of you. 9 years ago, following a few months with a persistent cough, which was originally diagnosed as reflux, my mother was eventually diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. Never a smoker, with the help of targeted therapy and a dedicated team, my mom lived with this cancer even as it had spread to other parts of her body. The treatment helped to keep the cancer at bay, even though it weakened her body over time. That being said, she found the strength to come to Emily's bat mitzvah over 5 years ago, and she was able to host our visits to Houston, including this past Thanksgiving, where she found the strength to be as present as she possibly could. But the truth is, this cancer took its toll, and after my most recent visit to Houston in August, we made the difficult decision as a family to cease with treatment and to transition my mom to in-home hospice. What we thought would be a matter of months ended up being just a few short weeks. She died peacefully at home with my father and my brother at her side. Following the news, Joy, the kids, and I then flew down to Houston, and joined by my in-laws and several wonderful colleagues and friends, I had the difficult honor of officiating at my mother's funeral. I mention this because I want to be honest with you about what I have been carrying these past few weeks, but really these past few years. It is hard to be in relationship if we don't know what each other is going through. And I'm asking all of you for a little grace, especially as I know some of you have been on similar journeys or are currently going through difficult journeys of your own. Grace, or chesed, is a concept that we don't speak about too much in our tradition, especially when it comes to concepts of asking for God's grace. Nevertheless, we learn from our tradition the importance of grace and compassion. For example, we are often willing to forgive ourselves regardless of our actions because we know our intent. But we are quick to judge others based off their actions, in part because if it is hurtful, we assume ill intent. This means we can sometimes read into others' words and actions something that may not actually be there. How can we avoid this pitfall? Our tradition offers at least two ways forward, including one found in the Akedah. When the angel called out, "Abraham, Abraham," he answered, "Hineni, I am here." This Hineni was more than just a, "I am physically present." Abraham was saying, "I am emotionally present. I am aware. I am listening." To be a congregation means that we need to find our way back to Hineni. We are blessed to have a diversity of experiences, thoughts, and opinions on any number of topics and world events. Unfortunately, we currently live in a world that shies away from such diversity of thought and dialogue. I think this is in part not just due to the phenomenon of social media, which has certainly exacerbated the issue, but also because of the 24-hour news cycle. Even I remember when there was 30 minutes of news every evening. News was viewed as a public service. And if you wanted to get more in depth into it, you had to read a newspaper. Nowadays, in competition for eyeballs for advertisers, with a 24-hour news cycle like with social media, it is about keeping you angry so you stay engaged. And then this anger and frustration spills over into other aspects of our lives, in our homes, in our schools, in our friend groups, and yes, even into our congregations. One of the reasons why I love congregational life is because there is so much diversity here. Diversity of experiences, diversity of thought, diversity of religious expression. You will find folks who make friends with others they would not have encountered in any other way except through congregational life. But what we cannot do is let the events of October 7th and the subsequent war, the war and suffering in Gaza, the events in Lebanon, and the most recent attacks by Iran, as well as the events of this most recent political cycle and other such elements of the collective zeitgeist, cause us to draw lines in the sand. Meaning our fallback position cannot be, this is my community only if it agrees with me on X or on Y. Rather, we must seek out the converse. To be Jewish means to struggle, not to have certainty. We need to find our way back to Hineni, I am here. Every week I'm honored to lead a discussion on Zohar, and the only promise that I have ever made to the class and will continue to make is that we will have small moments of insight followed by great moments of confusion. And it is beautiful. What we don't want to do is end up like Abraham and Isaac or Abraham and God, so certain of our experiences that we end up never speaking to one another again. There simply aren't enough of us in the world that we have the luxury to choose not to be in relationship with one another. Temple Israel was founded on the belief of creating a home for all seeking to express their true Jewish authentic selves. Like Zohar, it is intended to be a place of beauty and relationship, if not the occasional bafflement. A few weeks ago, I was honored to attend an event at the JCC featuring Broadway performer Ari Axelrod and his show, A Place for Us. For those who were able to attend, it was a powerful and moving experience. It was about the Jewish journey of Broadway expressed through song and storytelling, But it wasn't just about the history of Jewish Broadway, and I agree with Ari that the history of Broadway is Jewish. It was also about how we can find our place through the arts in today's troubling and challenging world. As Jews, we have faced such challenges before, but this time feels different. Probably because we have differing understandings and perspectives as to what is going on. And we are all also equally certain that those with whom we disagree with are wrong. The challenge is when certainty sets in, there's little room for disagreement. There's little room for chesed, for grace. And as we come together as a community on this Rosh Hashanah, this new year, I would like to offer an alternative to certainty. And that is relationship, hineni, to be present with one another. To do this, we must find ways to build relationships built upon sacred partnership, sacred dialogue, and sacred compassion. Therefore, our talk today is not about Israel or Gaza or Lebanon or Iran, even though it is. This talk today is not about this or any election cycle, even though it absolutely is. And that is because it is truly about you, it is about me, it is about us. And the only way we can move forward together is by being willing to genuinely see, hear, listen, and even disagree with one another, which is our tradition's second response to difficult times, and that is argument. Machlochet l'shem shamayim, arguments for the sake of heaven. In Jewish tradition, we have the concept of sacred argumentation. In our tradition, there are a couple of useful concepts when it comes to sacred disagreement. The first is machlochet, a conflict, debate, disagreement, or controversy. The second is l'shem shamayim, or lo l'shem shamayim, an argument considered for the sake of heaven or not for the sake of heaven. Sadly, in today's world, especially in social media, but not exclusively, any machlochet is mostly lo l'shem shamayim, not for the sake of heaven. It is for the sake of winning, for the sake of ego, or for the sake of simply wanting to be right. Rather, our tradition teaches sacred arguing should be focused on covering greater truths and greater understanding, or l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. But to do this means we need to understand how each of us comes from a place of both hurt and hope. Each of us is trying to bring a sense of repair and to lift up not just our voices, but also the voices of those we are most concerned about here and everywhere. We feel compassion and pain. If we get trapped by our own certainty, we will miss the opportunities that are right in front of us. A lesson I learned all too well. I would like to end with a story that I've not told anyone, not my wife, not my therapist, not you. It is a story that I'm only just now able to admit to myself. The last time I saw my mom in August, she was resting peacefully in her bed. Though I had gone to Houston suggesting to transition her to hospice, my Houston family simply was not ready. I felt that I had failed in my mission to Houston. I was so frustrated that in my anger and hurt, I did not say goodbye to her because I was certain I would see her again, because nothing was changing. I did not kiss her on the forehead. I did not say goodbye. I did not say I love you. I missed the chance to say farewell while she was still among the living. This is something I will have to carry with me, and I will need to learn to forgive myself for. But that is a sermon for another day. What I have learned is a powerful and important lesson through my own pain and grief about stubbornness and anger. That my certainty of the moment made me miss a much more important moment that I can never recapture. I was like Abraham, I was like Isaac, I was stuck, unwilling to reach out. What happened at the end of the Akedah does not have to be our final story. We do not have to walk alone in silence, hurting and frustrated. Instead, we have a chance to lean in, to build, to repair, to engage, to argue, and to listen. My prayer, my hope, my vision for this 5785 is that we are able to make space for all members of this community to engage in sacred disagreements, l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. That we find pathways to build our relationships with one another, hineni, by being present and willing to engage in arguments, l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. Sadly, all too often being Jewish means that we are lonely and alone in this much greater world, which often seeks to hold us accountable for that which we have not done. But if we find the ability to grant chesed, to grant grace to one another, maybe we can at least be lonely and alone together, or at least a little less lonely and alone, as we know there is a community that will always accept us and even embrace us, even if the rest of the world may try to tear us apart. I hope we can find ways to walk this path together, even if we may disagree in sacred ways. For by being in relationship with one another, we are inviting God to dwell in our midst, and for the holy to lift up our lives and our souls, especially during these challenging times. For where else can we find comfort and compassion and grace than if not with each other? In this way, may we all be able to say, hineni, we are here. L'shana tova yoter, may we at least have a better year than the one that just ended. As was said last night, may our prayers be found worthy so that we may each have a little more blessing, a little more healing, a little more hope, a little more peace, a little more sweetness, a little more chesed, grace for ourselves, for others in this day and in the days ahead. Kei nihi ratzon, may this be God's will. Amen.